position. So this is the tail, the body, and the head. So the head ni dekat dengan duodenum. So it is actually both an exocrine as well as endocrine gland lah. Okay, so maknanya this is the histo. Of course you get from your anatomy, and then of course the pipetto, you will see all the abnormal ones. Jadinya the structure of the eyelids lah. What we are concerned with, kita nak belajar on the endocrine, not the exocrine. So the endocrine parts of the pancreas ni, it is of the eyelids of Langerhans. So there are a lot of eyelids of Langerhans, maybe a million or more. So in each eyelid of Langerhans ni, dia ada banyak cells. But the eyelids of Langerhans ni bukanlah semuanya in the pancreas tu, so it only forms like 1 to 2% of the pancreas. So you can have like 1 million or more of these eyelids, and each eyelid you can have about 2,500 cells, which can contain 4 cell types. So we have alpha, we have beta cells, you have delta cells. Okay, so each like the beta cells, you can see the diagram, akan produce insulin. The alpha cells will produce glucagon, delta will produce somatostatin, and then the other cell types will just use others. But there are about 4 cell types. So in distribution, this is beta cell yang paling banyak. So 65% of the eyelids are of beta cells which produce insulin. Okay. So pancreas ni insulin, glucagon, somatostatin. But of course, the major one yang kita nak focus is insulin, and then followed by glucagon. So this is another picture lah ni daripada show. Okay, so sebab yang tadi tu previous saya tu it's a diagram, but without the blood vessels tu. Sebab you also have the blood vessels interspersed between the cells. So dekat dalam ni lebih kepada beta cells. And the blood tu dia akan overflow to the other cells juga. So bila these cells produce insulin in the blood circulation, and then dia akan break over the other cells yang dekat luar juga. That's how it's been displayed lah. Okay. So terus kita tengok for the insulin secretion, because insulin is a hormone. What are the factors that stimulate and what are the factors that inhibit? Macam biasa. So kita tengok the factors dulu, and then kita tengok macam mana that insulin is being the mechanism and all that. So first is, always ingatlah kalau insulin, dia punya aim is to reduce the blood glucose. So maknanya to reduce, that means you have to have a high blood glucose concentration in your blood. If you have high glucose concentration, baru your insulin akan dikeluarkan lah. Okay. So apart from what else is high, it's amino acid yang high fatty acid, high nucleic acid pun akan stimulate the insulin secretion. But most importantly is the blood glucose. So whenever there is a condition where your body has high blood glucose, then insulin will be secreted. So other factors will be cortisol. And then this one is glucose-dependent insulinotropic peptide. Maknanya dia cakap glucose-dependent, maknanya whenever this peptide ada, that means there's also a lot of glucose lah. So it makes sense still. So a lot of it that you bukan perlu hafal saja, but you can link to it. The main reason is maknanya there is high glucose in the blood. And then you also have, if you have high potassium in the blood, pun akan make the insulin to be secreted. We have vagal stimulation, acetylcholine, obesity, as well as some sulfonylurea drugs. And what can actually inhibit is the opposite. So kalau high blood glucose is stimulating, low blood glucose is inhibiting. So conditions where you have low blood glucose, so fasting, exercise, you will have low blood glucose, kan? You tak akan ada high blood glucose sebab you tengah menggunakan energy, so it will low blood glucose. And then somatostatin will also inhibit insulin secretion. Somatostatin from the delta cell tadi. Okay? So it's from the same eyelids, but when that hormone is actually inhibiting insulin. And then you also have alpha adrenergic then diazoxide. So diazoxide punya explanation is there lah. It is used to treat low blood sugar, but not the functional ones lah. Macam kalau kita hypo, kita tak bagi this medication. It's because you have abnormal high insulin secretion due to cancer ke. So to stop insulin punya actions, then you will give the patient diazoxide. Okay, so kita cakap when there is high glucose, you have your insulin being secreted. So this is what we're going to look at here. So what happens? Ini is the glucose, high glucose, and you tengok ending here, insulin is being secreted. So we are going to talk about this, and because this is insulin being secreted, this is actually the beta cell dekat islets of Langerhans, dekat pancreas. So first of all, dia perlu transport the glucose into the cell lah, into what cell? Into the beta cell. So how does that happen? Through the GLUT2, GLUT2 is a transporter, glucose transporter, which use facilitated diffusion. Okay, dia ada banyak dia ada GLUT1 sampai 7 even ada dalam genome, but you don't have to hafal, and for this purpose it's just GLUT2 saja. So that's all that you need to know. And then bila once the glucose dah masuk dalam cell, then they undergo metabolism. So first the glucose 2 through glucokinase enzyme, dia akan jadi glucose 6-phosphate. So from glucose 6-phosphate, dia akan undergo oxidation, in which dia akan produce ATP. So this ATP is the one that is going to make the potassium channel to close. So this potassium channel is sensitive to ATP. Bila ada ATP je, dia akan close this potassium channel. Potassium channel dekat tepi sini of the cell. So when the channel close, that potassium channel close, the membrane potential akan depolarize, and once depolarize, dia akan sensitize the calcium channel pula, because the calcium channel ni akan open when there is a voltage. So it is voltage dependent calcium channel. So bila ada depolarization, dia akan menyebabkan this channel to open. So initially you akan ada high calcium outside the cell. So dia akan enter the cell down its electrochemical gradient. So tak perlukan ATP, dia akan masuk dalam cell. So once when the calcium enters the cell, dia akan cause the increase of the intracellular calcium inside the beta cell. Okay, once when that happens, dia akan cause the insulin secretion via exocytosis. So insulin akan release into the blood circulation. I think it's not that complicated lah for physiological purpose. Tapi you can see that pharmaco, you have 2 lectures, 2 hours of antidiabetics. So at least you can fahamkan this how insulin works, and then all the other, sebab banyak dah diabetic drugs now. So dulu kita dengar metformin dengan, can't remember, there's just 2 previously, but now there's a lot. So I think that's why you need to pay attention lah, because it can be blocked at any point lah, and the drugs can, how would you create a drug that can help before that you kena tahu yang normal, and then you must know what is wrong, kan? And then once you know what is wrong, you try to think of how to overcome apa yang normal tu. So it will benefit if you can really understand this mechanism. So this is how high glucose will cause insulin secretion. So the amino acids and fatty acids pun sama juga konsep dia, macam glucose juga. So dia akan stimulate the secretion of insulin. As for glucagon will also stimulate the insulin secretion. Glucagon is the opposite of insulin, dia punya actions. But maknanya bila glucagon ada, that means there is a lot of glucose. So that's why glucagon also stimulate the insulin secretion. But how it stimulates is actually dia akan do different mechanism lah. Dia guna GQ protein. So dia actually akan cause dekat sini leads to a rise in intracellular calcium. And then dia akan exocytosis of this insulin. So anything that can cause high intracellular calcium pun boleh cause the insulin to be released. So maknanya they can work here, increase activation ke apa, or they can help potassium, block potassium. So a lot of things that boleh happen at every step. And what about these drugs? These are given to type 2 diabetes mellitus patients because dia akan close the potassium channels ni. So bila dia close, then dia akan go through all this and then eventually insulin will be released. As for somatostatin, dia akan inhibit the production of insulin, the secretion of insulin. Okay, actions of this insulin. So tadi insulin, so with insulin, with glucose, high glucose, then you get the insulin being secreted. So now actions of insulin, dia akan buat apa? Dia akan increase the glucose uptake into cells. So dia akan being produced when there is high glucose dalam blood. So bila high glucose dalam blood and then insulin comes into the blood circulation, with that the high glucose tu dia akan tolak semua glucose masuk dalam sel. So maknanya in the end there will be low blood glucose. That's the aim of this insulin. You remember that, you tak akan confuse. Takkan senang confuse. Just remember that one particular thing about insulin, dia akan be secret when there is high glucose, and dia buat apa? Dia akan kurangkan glucose dalam blood. So increase glucose uptake into cells, and then with that dia akan increase glycogen formation. So maknanya increase glycogenesis. Okay. So with that juga dia akan reduce glycogenolysis and dia reduce gluconeogenesis. So sebab insulin ni akan kurangkan glucose dalam badan. So all the other processes tu kena kurang lah. Okay. So dia akan for the protein, dia akan increase the protein synthesis, increase the fat deposition, and they reduce lipolysis and increase potassium uptake into the cells. Sebab tu juga kalau you pernah dengar kalau patients yang have high potassium, mungkin chronic patients, chronic kidney patients, their kidneys do not function anymore. They have hyperkalemia to the dangerous level that can cause cardiac arrest. So kita akan bagi dia bolus injection of cocktail, insulin cocktail. Untuk insulin ada glucose juga, because the insulin will actually help for the cells to uptake the potassium. Potassium banyak dalam blood ni, so it's very dangerous. So dia akan bagi bolus injection, intravenous lah, okay, slow bolus, maknanya inject slowly. And with that insulin akan reduce the potassium inside the blood circulation. Sebab dia akan increase uptake by the cells. So the effect is to lower the blood potassium concentration. And bracket sini, this is all concentration lah. Okay, so maknanya insulin kita in some books dia describe as hormone of abundance. Sebab dia dikeluarkan when there are a lot of glucose, a lot of amino acids, a lot of fatty acids. So in those conditions, those nutrients ada banyak. So insulin nak masukkan ke dalam sel untuk to be stored so that it can be used when it is needed, and also to maintain the glucose delivery to the brain. Okay, how this is the main action of insulin, right? Dia nak reduce the blood glucose concentration. So one is reduce the blood glucose concentration, and the other one is actually to limit the increase in blood glucose after you take carbohydrate. So it's almost the same lah, kan? Almost the same, but actually it's not really. Sebab satu is to reduce the blood glucose, and satu tu they limit the increase. Kita makan akan naik juga blood glucose, tapi with insulin dia akan limit that increase. So how does it do that? Dia akan increase the transport of the glucose to ke dalam target cells lah. Okay? With insulin, dia akan masukkan all the glucose dalam blood circulation tu, masuk into the muscles, masuk into the adipose by inserting the GLUT4 dekat cell membranes. So you've seen how the the glucose tadi masuk dalam sel and then the secretion of insulin. So with insulin keluar tu dia akan letak more of glucose. So when there's a transporter at the cell membrane, a lot more glucose boleh masuk ke dalam sel lah. Okay? So you can reduce the glucose outside in the circulation, can be reduced and more will be taken into the cells. And then the insulin will promote formation of glycogen in the liver, muscle, and then dia akan inhibit glycogenolysis lah. So these things, these terms ni, dia akan inhibit, stimulate, and then which one? Jangan tertukar. Jangan you cakap inhibit glycogenesis ke. Dia akan menstimulate glycogenesis. Kan, dia akan form. It is anabolic. Insulin akan store. So dia akan store glycogen. Yang dia inhibit adalah the breakdown of glycogen. So do not be terbalik-balik all those terms. Insulin inhibits the gluconeogenesis by increasing the production of fructose, and then which will increase the phosphofructokinase activity. Apa pun maknanya it is away from glucose formation. Sebab dia tak nak make the glucose high in the blood. Dia nak kurangkan. So dia kena inhibit glucogenesis ni. And maknanya the substrate tu, whatever that is being produced will not form glucose. It will form a different substrate, but it is not glucose. So insulin juga akan decrease fatty acid and the keto acid tu. So dia akan inhibit the metabolism lah, and the oxidation fatty acids, and then it's all for storage. Sebab hormone of abundance, these things are a lot dalam blood. So insulin nak masukkan dalam sel semua untuk store. So increase storage of fatty acids. So, in that way, dia akan lower the circulation of these fatty acids. So dekat adipose tissue, dia akan stimulate the fat deposition lah. Lipolysis kita kena inhibit. We do not want more in the blood. We want to simpan. So simpan, that means kena inhibit the lipolysis. At the liver, kita akan inhibit the keto acid formation, because now we have less fatty acid degradation. You will have less of this acetyl coenzyme A, so you tak boleh form these keto acids. So overall dia maknanya anabolic, maknanya dia build up storage. So insulin will increase the amino acid and protein uptake by tissues, target cells. Sama macam glucose tadi, semua will be uptake by the cells, by the tissues. Dia akan increase protein synthesis. Dia akan inhibit protein degradation. So that means you end up with less reduced levels of amino acids in the blood. Okay, other actions, as we mentioned tadi tu, dia also will promote the potassium uptake. At the same time, glucose masuk, dia pun akan promote potassium masuk dalam sel. So dia akan, how does it do that? By increasing the activity of sodium potassium ATPase. And then this one is another info, more dia punya deliberation. I think they're long ada kot. But this one is from Costanzo. We just mentioned as a statement. The direct effect on hypothalamic satiety center. Okay. So now we look at how insulin acts. So maknanya kalau hormon, dia kena ada receptor. Tadi yang earlier ones, kita tengok how when there is glucose, macam mana insulin being secreted. But now we are looking at the insulin and the receptor. So insulin, you can look at the diagram first. So dekat cell membrane ni, you have the insulin which is composed of tetramer, and you have the receptor. So the receptor is a tetramer. So we have alpha and beta. So alpha and alpha ni dia ada disulfide chain, and alpha and beta pun dia ada disulfide chain. So the beta one is in the cell membrane, tapi the alpha chain lies outside extracellular dekat situ. So dia ada 2 alpha and 2 beta subunits. This is your insulin receptor. So okay. So once insulin dah release in the circulation, so this is at the target cells lah, cell membrane. So dekat adipose tissue, dekat muscles. This is your insulin receptor at those target cells. So insulin sampai dia akan bind to the alpha subunits, not to the beta but to the alpha subunits, because this one is the one yang extracellular. Dia akan bind and then dia akan cause the conformational change. Once that is done, you have this activation of the enzyme tyrosine kinase. With that, dia akan phosphorylate with the presence of ATP. Phosphorylation ni yang akan menyebabkan all the metabolic actions of the insulin, which we have discussed tadi. That means to promote uptake of glucose and all that, increase amino acids, to inhibit lipolysis. So all those metabolic actions of the insulin. So target cell ni dia akan in the end dia akan macam engulf ataupun take in this receptor complex ni, hormone, insulin dan bind, and then this receptor, so dia akan take in. And the receptor tu nanti is either dia akan degrade, dia akan recycle, or it's being stored dekat dalam sel tu. Okay, so insulin dia akan downregulate the receptor by reducing the rate of synthesis. Yang kita dah bincang awal-awal masa overview of mechanism when we talk about downregulation. So an example is when insulin downregulates tu, so dia akan kurangkan the rate of synthesis of the receptor ni. Atau dia buat macam tu, is either reduce rate of synthesis or the increase rate of the degradation of these receptors. Okay, so problem of downregulation ni lah yang one of the reasons of what is happening in obesity and type 2 diabetes mellitus. Bila dia downregulate ni, maknanya downregulate the receptors, that means you can have the insulin but it will not be sensitive. So bila insulin tu tak sensitive pada receptor, so all the mechanisms the insulin tu tak boleh happen and cannot produce all the actions of insulin lah, because the receptor tu dia dah downregulate. Insulin is not sensitive anymore. Okay, habis dekat insulin. That's quite superficial and brief. So of course you can add on your reading. The mechanism of action of insulin tadi is very important. And then we look at glucagon. It's also from the islets of Langerhans ni. So dia adalah mirror to insulin, which means kalau insulin buat increase, glucagon akan decrease. Okay, glucagon tadi, kalau insulin kita cakap hormone of abundance. When there are a lot of glucose, a lot of amino acids in the blood, insulin will be secreted. So glucagon is the opposite. It's hormone of starvation. When there is low glucose, then glucagon will be secreted. So it is a single straight chain polypeptide consisting of 29 amino acids, mirror the insulin. So kalau insulin tadi dia nak store, dia nak simpan je all the nutrients kan, dia nak simpan fat deposit semua tu, but kalau glucagon dia nak break it down, dia nak mobilize. So what will inhibit the synthesis of glucagon? So actually glucose and insulin will inhibit the synthesis of glucagon. Okay, so sama macam insulin tadi, kita tengok at the stimulatory and the inhibitory factors of the glucagon secretion. It's the opposite of insulin. So kalau glucagon secretion, there will be kalau low glucose concentration, then you akan secrete glucagon. If you are maknanya in conditions where you have low glucose concentration, that is when you are fasting, when you are exercising, when you have infection, then your glucose will be low. So those are conditions where your glucagon will be secreted. But when there is high amino acid concentration, glucagon is also secreted. Yang ini dia sama dengan insulin. Insulin pun high amino acid, dia akan promote the secretion of insulin. Untuk insulin, so sama untuk glucagon, high amino acid dia akan stimulate glucagon secretion. And then also cholecystokinin and gastrin akan stimulate glucagon secretion. Beta-adrenergic, acetylcholine, cortisol and other stresses will also promote glucagon secretion. Okay, kalau inhibitory, maknanya the opposite lah, when we have high glucose or when there is presence of glucose, then glucagon will not be secreted. Or when there is insulin, then glucagon secretion will be inhibited. Ketones and then free fatty acid, and when we have high fatty acid, keto acid, kekurangan yang kita sebutkan. And then alpha adrenergic agonist, and then also somatostatin. So if you can recall tadi earlier, somatostatin is actually inhibiting both insulin as well as glucagon punya secretion. CCK ni is when you ingest protein or fat, it will be secreted. So somatostatin ni dia akan inhibit both insulin and glucagon through the paracrine action, sebab dia come from the same islets of Langerhans kan. Cuma glucagon is by alpha cells and insulin is by beta cells. Somatostatin ni is being secreted by the other cells, the delta cells. So once you eat, then the somatostatin akan secreted, dia akan diffuse to alpha and beta cells. So this will inhibit the secretion of insulin and the glucagon. So they inhibit both insulin and glucagon. In a way, maknanya this somatostatin dia control lah, dia modulate the insulin and glucagon when you ingest food tadi. Sebab somehow dia inhibit both insulin as well as the glucagon. So again, for you not to lose focus, you must remember the aim of each of the hormone. Macam tadi insulin, dia punya aim adalah to reduce the glucose concentration, but as glucagon is the mirror of insulin, glucagon punya aim is to increase, naikkan blood glucose concentration. So normally the major stimulating factor is again the glucose, blood glucose. Maknanya when you have low blood glucose concentration, then this glucagon will be secreted. When there is insulin, dia akan inhibit this glucagon secretion. So dalam condition where we have type 1 diabetes mellitus, nanti kita tengok the two types ni, type 1 and type 2. Kalau type 1 ni, dia punya condition is there is no insulin dalam the circulation. So in that case, this glucagon will actually respond to the hypoglycemia in over respond, the exaggerated. And so it will cause severe hypoglycemia. Sebab glucagon will cause increased blood glucose concentration. And because in that disease, in type 1 diabetes, there is no insulin at all. So instead dia akan go overboard and will cause severe hypoglycemia in that patient. Okay, this one, kalau you take high protein meal, so you have high amino acids. This will actually increase both insulin and glucagon secretion. Although insulin and glucagon ni, dia punya actions are like opposites. So insulin, what it will do is, again, do not lose focus, is that insulin will target tissues to take in the amino acids and then dia akan build up protein. But the glucagon, dia akan increase glucose synthesis from the amino acids in the liver. So that happens, both. Dia akan increase both insulin and glucagon secretion when you take high protein meal. So for both protein synthesis and gluconeogenesis from the amino acids, gluconeogenesis, you make glucose from those amino acids. It results from the low, but at the same time, both secretion of insulin and glucagon, because you take the high protein meals that you do. So that is to say, because both insulin and glucagon, the punya secretion is stimulated by high amino acids. Okay, takut nanti baca semula macam confused, kata opposite, tapi only for this amino acids ni, in both cases, glucagon dan insulin, memang dia increase the secretion. Okay, the actions of glucagon, so dia akan increase glycogenolysis, increase gluconeogenesis, increase lipolysis, high keto acid formation. So dia semua yang the opposite of insulin. So in the end, maknanya dia akan effect dia adalah high blood glucose concentration, fatty acid and keto acid concentration pun semua high. So how does that happen? First, dia akan increase glycogenolysis, and then at the same time dia inhibit the glycogen formation from glucose lah. So dia akan juga on top of glycogenolysis, dia juga buat gluconeogenesis. So tadi kalau insulin, dia akan increase production of this glyphosate, But for glucagon, dia akan reduce production. So dia akan reduce this activity, therefore dia akan go towards glucose formation. For insulin, dia akan away from glucose formation, tapi for glucagon, dia akan towards glucose formation sebab memang objektif dia adalah to increase blood glucose concentration. So amino acids, they are being used for gluconeogenesis, and the output of this amino groups ni dia akan masuk dalam urea. You have high circulating levels of fatty acids bila ada glucagon secreted ni. So in adipose tissue dia akan it's quite simple kan, sebab dia explanation is always the same. So kalau as long as you know glucagon tu dia punya ending dia apa, then you can actually explain all the other metabolic processes. So in adipose tissue dia akan increase lipolysis lah, sebab dia akan dia punya result will be high circulating levels of fatty acids, and dia akan inhibit fat deposition or fatty acid synthesis. So dia akan go towards gluconeogenesis. Dia akan create more glucose. So keto acid and acetoacetic acid are from the fatty acids. Okay, finally, somatostatin. You also have somatostatin tadi, yang the ones that inhibit both insulin dengan glucagon. So somatostatin also comes from the islets of the Langerhans by the delta cells, and it is a polypeptide with 14 amino acids. So when is it being secreted? When you actually ingest all sort of nutrients, glucose, amino acids, fatty acids, pun dia akan being secreted. And then glucagon is also stimulating the secretion of somatostatin. Okay, glucagon stimulates somatostatin, but somatostatin inhibit glucagon and insulin. So beta-adrenergic agonist is also stimulating the somatostatin, and then you also have high circulating levels of fatty acids and keto acids, which will also stimulate somatostatin to be secreted. What can inhibit is insulin. So glucagon actually stimulate somatostatin release, but insulin will inhibit the somatostatin release. But the somatostatin will inhibit insulin and glucagon, both bigger. So the insulin, how they inhibit somatostatin release is by the intra-islet paracrine mechanism. It's inside the cell islets itself lah. Okay, sebab dia dekat-dekat je cell dia in the same islets. So through that. So I think this is a bit too small. But this one is from, if you nak tengok lah, there are other, I think she would put it. So this is just extra je. That one is from the, I pun tak lupa. So the liver, you have the pancreas, and then the liver, and then the adipose tissue. You can explain how the glucose metabolism is involved. Okay, on the blood nutrient level. So you incorporate all whatever hormones that you already have learned and how it actually affects them. There are many other figures that shows when this hormone is up, then what happens, and when this hormone is down, what happens to it. So that when it's extra, you still need to go and read up your boleh baca Gano pun boleh. And then pathophysio, this one yang I cakap, I just gave a bit just about, I think will also be covered extensively in Peto. So basically, kita ada dua diabetes DM. I hope you are quite familiar sebab ramai orang ada diabetes. Ada tak yang tak ada diabetes in your family?
Tak ada diabetes.
Kalau maknanya it's quite common. So at least now that you are here, you are learning about the endocrine system. So you should know now. So whoever in your family ada diabetes, you can already like, oh, this is what's happening inside you, inside your uncle, inside your whoever lah yang ada diabetes tu. So sometimes when you understand your disease, when the patient understands the disease, it's easier for them to be compliant. Kadang-kadang bila dia tak faham, and so dia tak tahu what are the effects of drugs itu, lagi dia tak berapa nak makan ubat, dia lupa and all that. So you have type 1 and type 2. This is not the full explanation because I think in peto. But type 1 ni maknanya biasanya in juvenile, biasanya. But there are also cases which actually develop later. Juvenile maknanya develop masa masa not adult lah, masa children. So IDDM means insulin dependent diabetes mellitus or type 1. And IDDM maknanya non-insulin dependent diabetes mellitus. Okay, kencing manis lah. Okay, so the main difference adalah dia punya cost tu. Kalau type 1, dia destruction of the beta cells. So that can be an autoimmune. So out of no reason, dia punya body tak produce these beta cells. So beta cells produce insulin kan. So if there is destruction of these beta cells, so no insulin in that patient. Kalau this type 2, which usually develop in adults, dah tua baru dapat diabetes semua. So this one is usually, it is caused by the down regulation of the insulin receptors, dekat target tissues and the insulin resistance. And it is usually associated with obesity. But itulah in this textbook first time tu, dia tak ada relate langsung with genetic. Because usually kalau kita ambil history from patient, kita akan tanyakan apa ada history of any family history, ada sesiapa yang ada kencing manis, ada darah tinggi. So but in here they just mention associated with obesity. Okay, so for type 2 it is caused by downregulation of the insulin receptors in target tissues and there is insulin resistance, which means bukan dia tak ada insulin, so dia ada insulin. You can have a lot of insulin, but if your insulin is not sensitive or it is resistant, then still your insulin won't work and still you will end up with high blood glucose. So kalau in type 1 we have inadequate amounts of almost tak ada, it will affect the metabolism of these carbohydrate, fat, protein, semua tu will be affected. So what the patients will have, dia akan dapat high blood glucose lah sebab insulin tak ada. Patutnya kalau high blood glucose, you will have insulin so that it can promote uptake into the cells. But now there is none, so that's why you end up with high blood glucose, you ada high blood fatty acid, and then you cannot utilize the keto acids too, and then you have high blood amino acid juga. So all the actions of insulin tu tak boleh take place, and then you can also have hyperkalemia and diabetic ketoacidosis. So the treatment is sebab dia punya reason dia tak ada insulin, treatment dia adalah insulin replacement therapy. Kalau in type 2, then you can have normal amounts of insulin, and even in some patients you even have a very high insulin punya level, tapi sebab to compensate the resistance or the tak sensitive of the receptors tu. So you can have high blood glucose even in fasting as well as after makan, postprandial. So the treatment is probably your diet, caloric restriction, weight reduction, and then all the drugs. And there are a lot of drugs for anti-diabetes, so sebab tu you kena pay attention. And because it is very common and it is better that you understand it daripada awal lah from now. So metformin ni memang dah lama ni, daripada dulu sampai sekarang, and I think it is still being used. But there are more new drugs, anti-diabetic drugs that I have not learned before, tak pernah dengar, so maknanya it has already advanced a lot. So maknanya you all memang kena pay attention for Prof. Syarida punya lecture next week. So this metformin, contohnya what it does is it upregulates the insulin receptors on target tissue. Sebab you as a treating doctor, you do not want the complications of the disease. So the complications of the disease is mainly when the high blood glucose concentration in the blood. So you try your best to not let patients have high blood glucose. Sebab nanti the clinician, the endocrinologist, will also give you a talk, a lecture and he will probably share what are the complications that can arise from diabetes. A lot of things, and then you can also develop hypertension, you can develop eye, and then you can your infection susah nak baik, kan? The legs can be amputated. A lot of things will go down that way with diabetes because of the high glucose in the blood. So with the drugs ni, there are a lot of ways lah kot dia akan try to address dekat mana, so that insulin, so you boleh appreciate lah nanti the drugs tu dia akan act dekat mana and how. Does it act on the receptor? Does it act on the enzyme? So you can appreciate that lah. Yes, but then it is easier for you to understand. And then some drugs maybe they will try to develop, because some drugs mungkin with that also comes various side effects. So kadang-kadang patients dia tak nak ambil ubat sebab of side effects tu. So that is why penting for you as future doctors to actually understand how the drug works, so that you will be able to explain to your patients kenapa kena ambil ubat ni, ubat ni buat macam mana, and what are the side effects especially. If you don't explain that to your patients, that patient jumpa you sekali, tak makan ubat, and then the next follow up, still condition dia sama ataupun it's worse. Yeah? So it's better that you explain. Okay, that is all for this pancreas. Okay, so tomorrow we have BBL, and then next week there's only one more lecture then. And then for the last slot, next Friday, we have a 2-hour, which I say kita nak buat team-based learning. That is endocrinology physiology. You'll be given a quiz. First, you do it individually, personally, and then you do it in a team. I will upload the instructions semua tu dekat your intrablast. But also you'll be actively discussing with each other. So please go through all the notes before, and also try to upload any relevant videos for you to prepare and read during this weekend. But on Friday, 5 January, it starts at 9. Do you have anything at 8? Can we move it up to 8? Sebab I'm involved with the team, so we're going to the camp on Friday itself. A bit tight. If you are free at 8 o'clock, can we just take the date earlier? So 8 to 10. Ada siapa-siapa ada any kelas ganti ke apa?
Oh, next week kan. Minggu ni. Dah tengah kan tu okey lah.
Okay. Nanti bagi tahu. Okay? Because I really like it to be earlier, so that not to hurry for me lah. Sebab after that it's quite a rush. Okay, so lepas tu apa ni? Another one actually concern. Okay, so I put up like a forum dekat Ultraplus tu. Kalau you have any issues nak tanya ke apa, you just use that lah. Siapa-siapa boleh letak kat situ, even any of you pun boleh answer, question and answer. Okay, lagi tak ada apa kan? Right, so that's all for today. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, Doctor.